الحمد لله رب العالمين. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اهتدى بهداه إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد. Dear brothers and sisters, this is lesson number 2 of our commentary on Aqidat al-Najah by Imam Muhammad ibn Ja'far al-Kettani rahimahullah tabaraka wa ta'ala. And last time I started speaking about who is Al-Imam Kettani, and I spoke about when he was born and where he was born and where did he study, who were his professors, or some of them. Actually, I didn't mention all of the professors. And until I mentioned how his activities and stuff like that. He went to Hajj, the year that he went to Hajj. Then he came back. Then he went to Hajj second time. And then he remained a little bit in Medina. Actually, he went to Medina, migrating from the colonization of France. When France decided to colonize Morocco, he decided to withdraw to Medina, to migrate to Medina. Some can ask and say, why did Sheikh Muhammad ibn Ja'far al-Kettani didn't protect his country and he preferred to migrate? The question is, or the answer is that Sheikh made his best to protect his country. And he had a good relationship with the king that used to rule Morocco in that era. His name is Sultan Abdulaziz bin Hassan Al-Alawi. Sultan Abdulaziz was a bit weak, and Sheikh went and visited him and gave him his advices. The king actually was influenced by the Sheikh, but as I told you last time, his ministers told him, this is only a scholar and a faqih. These guys don't know in politics and stuff like that. That led to a coup. That means the king's brother, whose name was Abdul Hafiz, and he was his successor in Marrakesh. So he took place and he promised people to Islam and to continue jihad against the enemies who tried to colonize Morocco. But actually, when he took place, he didn't do anything, as I told you. And instead of that, he cooperated with the French colonization until he signed with them a treatment that they can take place in Morocco and protects, between brackets, Morocco. Protect from whom? I don't know from whom. So Sheikh, when he saw where Morocco was going, and he made his best, and he even wrote a book called Nasihatu Ahli al-Islam bima yadfa'u anhum da' al-kafarat al-li'am. The advice for all Muslims, how could they avoid the enemies of Islam that want to invade their countries. And it's a very interesting book. This book is published several times, and it mentioned 12 reasons how Muslims went down and how they can go up again. He made it like an advice to the king. And then he wrote it in general for all Muslims. So Sheikh didn't escape, actually. It's not because he didn't take his responsibilities. No, he saw that all of his efforts and the efforts of his colleagues and other scholars didn't do anything, and the king that he expected that he would he would work for Islam. Actually, he didn't work for Islam. So therefore, Shaykh decided to migrate. Ardullah wasi'a. Alhamdulillah, the land of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is wide. And wherever you go, you can worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the land of Islam is all one land. And Shaykh was very strict in his relationship with non-Muslims, as I'm going to mention. He was very pious and he was very strict in these things. So he decided to go to Medina. It's the country or the city of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he remained there until the situation went worse between the ruler of Hijaz, who was King Hussein, the grandfather of the kings of Jordan, and the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire. So the Ottoman Empire decided to take all scholars and all well-known people in Medina to Damascus, to Syria, which was still under the authority of the Ottoman Empire in those ages. So therefore, Shaykh, he went to Damascus, and he had good relationship with all scholars of Damascus, of Syria. And all of them respected him, and all of them came to him, and he started giving his lectures in the great masjid of Bani Umayyah in Damascus. And he wrote several books, and he gave lots of lectures, and all scholars of Syria respected him and participated in his lectures. And the great scholar of Syria in those days was Sheikh Badr al-Din al-Baybani rahimahullah. He was his best friend there. They were always with each other. So when Sheikh remained there, things went worse, and the Ottoman Empire went in the First World Battle. Was an ally of Germany, and then it lost the battle. So the Ottoman Empire collapsed, and the Republic of Turkey, which was a republic that was against Islam totally. In the beginning, Mustafa Kemal didn't show his worst face, his bad face. But later on, he started being mean and bad gradually. So the Sheikh, when he saw that, and later on, France took place in, first of all, Britain took place in Syria and Palestine and Jordan, all these places. And later on, Syria took place there. And not Syria, I mean France took place there. So he discovered that all Islamic lands now are all under the authority of Europeans, non-Muslims. So therefore he decided to go back to his country, Fez, Morocco, and at least visit his family and see what's happening there. And that was in the year 1345. Which is nearly 1926, where he went back to Fez. All Morocco came to welcome him, and all of them were so happy to visit him and see him. And he remained about 6 months, and in Ramadan, the year 1345, he passed away in Fez, and he was buried there, rahimahullah tabaraka wa ta'ala. And when he remained there, he started giving lectures in Qarawiyyin, especially studying the book of Musnad al-Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah, which he started in Damascus, and he started continuing it in Fez, but he passed and he didn't complete the book, rahimahullah. This is Shaykh Muhammad ibn Ja'far al-Kettani rahimahullah. And I would like now to give some lightnings on his personality, in his way of life, in his beliefs and stuff like that, so that you can know him. I mean, and maybe you can speak even about his students and stuff like that. Anyways, Shaykh rahimahullah was Maliki. He was Maliki, and he was serious in following the Maliki jurisprudence. But he used to say, I'm Maliki in what is halal, what is haram. But when it comes to attributes, morals, all of these things, I follow what is more stronger in the hadith. And this is actually the opinion of lots of latest Maliki scholars. They used to say, we are Maliki in halal and haram, but when it comes to adab and akhlaq and these things, we follow madhab ahl hadith. That's what they used to say. And this opinion was mentioned in the book of Al-Mawwaq, Muhammad ibn Yusuf Al-Mawwaq al-Gharnati, the last scholar of Granada, who passed away in the last year where Muslims, where Spain invaded Granada, which was in the year 897 Hijri. So Imam al-Mawwaqi has a very interesting book called Sanan al-Muhtadeen fi Maqamat al-Din, where he mentioned this, and he said that this is the opinion of his scholars, especially Shaykh al-Shuyukh. He was called Shaykh al-Shuyukh of Al-Andalus, Imam Abu Sa'id Qasim ibn Lub al-Gharnati rahimahullah, and it's the opinion of Abi Abdullah al-Haffar, one of the latest scholars in that era, in Fez, and other great latest Maliki scholars. Imam Mawwaq has an interesting commentary on Mukhtasar Khalil. It's called At-Taj wal-Iklil, and he mentioned his opinions there in that book. It's a very interesting commentary of Mukhtasar Khalil. So Shaykh Muhammad Ja'far Kettani was the same, and that's why he says, I make wudu. He used to say, أتوضأ على مذهب مالك وأصلي على مذهب الشافعي. I make my wudu according to the Maliki way, but I pray according to the Shafi'i way. Why? He says, because the Maliki wudu is more complete than the Shafi'i. Shafi'i say you can, when you want to pass the water on your head, you just pass a part of your head. Maliki say no, you have to pass on all of your head, and if the hair was long, you follow the hair. That's the Maliki opinion, as we studied in Ibn Ashir and others. So therefore, Malikis are more complete than the Shafi'is in this. But in prayer, Malikis say, you don't say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Many of them say don't put your hands over each other, and other things. You make one taslima, several things. The Shafi'is no. They say you have to say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. You have to recite Al-Fatiha behind the Imam. A lot of these things. And they make qunut in Fajr after Sami Allahu liman hamida. Malikis before Sami Allahu liman hamida, and they make it silently. So, therefore, Shaykh Muhammad Ja'far used to say, no, the Shafi'i way of praying is more complete and more close to the Sunnah than the Maliki way. This is his opinion, and it's the same thing that all of his students and children used to do. His grandsons, his sons, etc., until it reaches to the grandsons and stuff like that. My grandfather, Imam Muhammad al-Muntasir al-Kettani, in his introduction to Al-Risala al-Mustatrafa, which is the book of his grandfather, Imam Muhammad Ja'far al-Kettani, he says that my father told me, this is what he says, my father told me that his father, Imam Muhammad Ja'far al-Kettani, was Salafiyul Aqeedah. This is what he says. He says, كان أخبرني عنه والدي رحمه الله بأنه كان سلفي العقيدة لا يؤول الأسماء الإلهية والصفات. He didn't use to say that the names and the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have figurative meanings. And he used to pass those attributes as they are in the way that suits the majesty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says Allah knows the meanings of those attributes. He says that the Ash'aris and the Maturidis actually, they don't say that when we say it has a figurative meaning, that figurative meaning is exactly what we say. We just say, we expect it means so and so. For example, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He created Adam with His hands, with His two hands, they say that means with His power. But He says they don't mean power. They say, well, one of the meanings of hand in Arabic means power. Yad. Yad, one of the meanings of it, they say it's power. This is what they say. So he says they don't mean what they said. They just don't want to make an image of God that would stick in the opinions of people, and so they start imagining God like a man or like a person, which is totally wrong. So it's just like taking an excuse for Muslim scholars. Take an excuse for Muslim scholars. Imam Muhammad Jafar rahimahullah used to prefer in politics, according to what my grandfather says, the republic system rather than the monarchy. He says why? Because he says, look how kings that ruled Muslims, they took responsibility, but they weren't in a responsible case. So they lost all Muslims' lands. They destroyed a lot of things because of their desires and stuff like that. And nobody had an opinion to tell them stop or what you're doing is wrong. No, there was no parliament. There was nothing to stop them from following their desires. Where actually, the new republic system has a parliament and has a government that is responsible near the parliament, and the parliament is the opinion of the public. It represents all the public. So that's why people have the right to give their opinions about what's happening in politics, what's happening in their life, because they pay the taxes and they vote. Monarchies, it's a king that then when he passes, his son comes and that's it. And he's not responsible for anything actually. So Sheikh used to see that this way is better, because when you have this president, he is responsible near the public. He's responsible near the public. Sheikh even has other opinions in fiqh that might not be according to the mashhur al-madhab. But actually, it's not only his opinions actually, because it's the opinion of the latest Fasi scholars or the latest Malikis that used to follow what is called ma jara bihi al-amal. Ma jara bihi al-amal, that means something that everybody starts to do. So they say, okay, we follow the other opinion that supports this opinion, because everybody does that. We're not going to change people. Instead of that, we can follow an opinion that exists in the Maliki school, but it's not the most known opinion. And that's another story, actually. The story of ma jara bihi al-amal is another story that we can speak about later, inshallah. A Shaykh used to say that the latest scholars ruined the Islamic jurisprudence. Why? Because they kept on giving branches and branches, and they became far from the beauty of Islam, which is derived from the Quran and the Sunnah. From the Quran and the Sunnah. So therefore, he says we have to go back gradually and until we reach to the opinions of other scholars, tabi'een, a'imma, others that give the beauty of Islam and follow the evidence of the fiqh, which makes the fiqh beautiful. And then we can, after that, when understand the fiqh, understand the origins, we can derive all answers for new things that we see in our lives. Shaykh wrote lots of interesting books. He wrote in Ilm al-Hadith, which was one of his, he was specialized in Ilm al-Hadith. He wrote a very interesting book called الرسالة المستطرفة لبيان مشهور كتب السنة المشرفة. This book, الرسالة المستطرفة لبيان مشهور كتب السنة المشرفة, which shows the books of in all branches of the books that are written in the old way, حدثنا, أخبارنا, etc. in all branches of Islamic knowledge. This book actually was asked by a scholar, I think it's Sheikh Muhammad Habibullah ibn Mayaba al-Jakani, which is a Shangiti scholar. He asked Sheikh to write a book about what any seeker of knowledge, of hadith knowledge, searches for. So he wrote a book called ما لا يسع المحدث جهله, the thing that al-muhaddith cannot be ignorant about. And then he went writing the book again, and he went writing it in details, which made it a very interesting book. This book is studied now in universities. They give it as a book that Islamic universities study in this branch of knowledge. It's very interesting. It's published several times, and you can find a lot of copies of it, or a lot of editions of it, sorry. He has a book called شفاء الأسقام بما يكفر ما تقدم وما تأخر من الذنوب والآثام. شفاء الأسقام. It's a book that mentions all the hadith that says if you do so and so, Allah will forgive all your sins, the past and the sins that are coming later on. Very interesting book. He has another book called بلوغ القصد والمرام ببيان ما تنفر منه الملائكة الكرام. Things that make angels escape from you. Like, for example, if you have images in your house, that makes angels out of your house. If you get a dog inside your house, that makes it. And there are lots of things. It's a very interesting book. It was published a long time ago, but it was republished again later on, since maybe 1 year or something like that. It was published again, I think, in Arabia. Yes. He has a book called نظم المتناثر من الحديث المتواتر. Very interesting book that mentions all the hadith that is mutawatir. This book is very interesting, and it's published. It was published several times. It's interesting, and it's famous, and it's one of the books that people depend on. He has a book called إسعاف الراغب الشائق في مولد خير الخلائق. That means he mentions in it the mawlid of our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When was he born? How was he born? The story of his born. It's actually a book of mawlid. Actually, it's read. People read it in the mawlid, and until now, people read it in the mawalid, in Fez, in Morocco, in lots of countries. They read this book, and in the beginning of it, he discusses about is the mawlid permissible or not permissible, and he chooses, of course, that it's permissible. And he used to do the mawlid. The day of mawlid, he used to respect it a lot. He used to make a huge party, and he calls people, and he gives lots of food in that day. Actually, it was something that he believes it's something good to do. The same thing. He has another book about that called Al-Yumn wal-Is'ad bi-Mawlid Khair al-Ibad. So he has two books about the Mawlid, Al-Is'af Raghib al-Shaykh and Al-Yumn wal-Is'ad. All of these books are published. He has a book called الدعامة في أحكام سنة الإمامة, a book that speaks about the turban and that it's a sunnah to wear and stuff like that. He wrote it when he was in Syria, and he saw that a lot of people from the new generations used to hate wearing the turban, and they used to be disgusted from the turban. So he said, guys, the turban is part of our entity, and it's sunnah, and Muslims since ever used to wear it, and etc. He mentioned a lot of hadith in that. The book was published a long time in Damascus, and then it was published later on in Lebanon. He has another book called الأقاويل المفصلة لحديث الابتداء بالبسملة حديث كل ذي بال. Anything that is important, you don't start it by Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, it's rubbish. He mentions this hadith and he speaks about it. Is it authentic? It's not authentic, etc. It's published. It was published a long time ago, and it's published again. It was published later in Damascus. This is in hadith. He has a book that speaks about things that we have in our days, like the book of Nasihatu al-Islam that I mentioned, which mentions 12 things that made Muslims go down and how they can improve again. It's very important, actually. And he has another book called Irshadul Halik, or Irshadul Malik lima yajibu alayhi min muwasatil halik. When the days are very tough, like nowadays, and people are there's an epidemic and stuff like that, and people need to help each other. So he mentions all hadith and stuff like that, how to help people, how help your brothers, and how you serve your brothers, your neighbors, and stuff like that. He wrote lots of books in history, especially Moroccan history, and he has a very important book that mentions the history of Fez, and it's a biography of all scholars and important people and pious people and even stupid people of Fez. When I say stupid or mad people, it's better than stupid. Mad people that used to inhabit Fez. It's published in 3 volumes, and later on it was published a few years ago in a new edition in 5 volumes with some studies and with biographies and etc. A lot of things like that. It's called سلوة الأنفاس في بيان من كان من العلماء والصلحاء بمدينة فاس. He has a book called الأزهار العاطرة الأنفاس في مناقب الإمام إدريس بن إدريس باني فاس. It's a biography or a history about Imam Idris that built Fez. Idris ibn Abdullah bin Hassan bin Ali bin Abi Talib radiyallahu tabaraka wa ta'ala anhu, who was the one who found the city of Fez. He has some books in tafsir, and he has some books in hadith, a lot of books in hadith. Some of them are commentaries, some of them are ijazat that he wrote to people. Some of them, he has a book that, very interesting, the Prophet ﷺ spoke in other languages than Arabic. And he mentions lots of hadith where the Prophet ﷺ used some non-Arabic words to speak to people. This guy or this guy. And he has, and fiqh. In fiqh he has lots of books. He has a book called سلوك السبيل الواضح لبيان أن القبض في الصلوات كلها مشهور وراجح. It speaks about to put right hand and left hand, and he says that this is actually the real Maliki opinion. It's a very interesting book. It's in 1 volume. It's not published, still not published. And he has a book that was published 2 years ago, where he speaks about how to prove that Ramadan enters. So it's called إرشاد العوام لما به العمل في الصيام. And he has a book about, actually he has lots of books in fiqh. He has books in tasawwuf. And speaking about tasawwuf, was Al-Imam Muhammad Ja'far rahimahullah a Sufi? Yes, he was Sufi. And he used to support Sufis, and he used to support even lots of their opinions, the latest Sufis, were actually, you can agree or disagree about some of his opinions. It's not a big deal, actually. So he has several books in Tasawwuf. He has lots of books in Tasawwuf, yes. He has books in theology, or not theology, in Muslim beliefs. He has a book called البيان لما يرجع لأحوال المكلفين في عقائد الإيمان. It's a very interesting book which shows the beliefs of Muslims. What are the main things that you have to believe. He has lots of books in history as well. He has his journey to Hijaz and Sham and Egypt. He wrote it in one volume. It's published. He has a book in the Kettani family. It's in a big volume. Who were they? Where did they come from? Who are their members? The lineage and stuff like that. He has a very interesting book in a big volume. It's published later. It's published several times about smoking. And he was very strict on smoking. He says smoking is haram totally. And he mentioned that by mentioning what doctors and physicians said. It's very interesting. And he spoke about the nicotine and stuff like that. So actually this book is very interesting, and it's published several times, as I told you. And he has, yes, lots of books actually. And let me tell you now, Shaykh rahimahullah, I'm going to mention some lightnings on his life. Shaykh was very pious when he was in Morocco, since he was still young. And because he was in a high rank of piety, he didn't used to eat anything that is not legal. And anybody that has money that he suspects about, he doesn't eat it. So once his father used to always meet the king of Morocco in those days. His name is Hassan ibn Muhammad ibn Abdul Rahman, or they say Hassan the first, because Hassan the second is passed since 20 years ago. But this is Hassan the first, the grandfather of Hassan. Hassan the first was one of the last strong Moroccan kings or sultans before the colonization of France. And he used to respect scholars and ask them to give him opinions and solutions for lots of things. So once he said to Imam Ja'far ibn Idris al-Kettani that I heard that you have a pious son and I would like to meet him. So he excused him. He said, well, actually he has some circumstances. So he said, no, I want to see him. And I heard this story from my grandfather. And I think I read it even in a book. I read it in the biography or that was written by the son of Imam Muhammad Ja'far al-Kettani. He had 3 main sons that were well known. He has a lot of sons and daughters. Maybe he had 30 sons and daughters. But I'm going to mention his sons and daughters, or the most important amongst them. So this biography was written by his son, Sheikh Muhammad Zamzam al-Kettani. Muhammad Zamzam al-Kettani. He wrote a book about the life of his father. Very interesting book. So he mentioned this story as well. So he said to him, my son, we're going to meet somebody, so please wear your best clothes, white garments and stuff like that. So he said, okay. He used to respect his father a lot. When he saw him going towards the palace, he sat down on his knees and started begging his father and said, dear father, please don't take me to the castle, to the palace of the king. I don't want to go there. So he said, okay, just go away. Once one of the policemen, if we can say, or the The people that work inside the palace came to him and gave him a gift. He used to respect him and love him. So he gave him a gift. So Sheikh said, no, I don't take gifts from anybody that works with the authorities. So the guy went so sad and angry, and he took out his weapon, and he said, if you don't take that, I'm going to kill myself near you. So he was afraid, and he took that. And when his father knew that, he was so angry. He said to him, next time, never do that. If anybody gives you something, take it and give it to anybody you want. But don't give it back to people because you abuse them in that way. Shaykh Rahimahullah, in the beginning, didn't used to like to see or meet anybody who is non-Muslim. And he even, when he was going to the Hajj and they stopped in Marseille in France, he stayed crying, and he said, how can I be in a land, a non-Muslim land? And until they went they kept on going. But later on, when he went to Syria, and Syria is mixed, there are Christians there are Jews there are so, there was a revolution against France, and lots of those young men that participated in that revolution didn't gain, and they were imprisoned. So their parents came to Sheikh Muhammad Ja'far, please, Sidi, speak to the government to release our children. So he said, okay, and he sent a message to the French authorities, and because they used to respect scholars and stuff like that, they released them. They released all of those captives. They respected them, and they released those captives. And once General Goro, who was considered as one of the greatest French generals that was that took place in Syria, decided to visit him. So you can't tell him, no, don't visit me. For what did he do? He said, I'm not going to go and stand up for this guy who was actually an enemy, and he colonized our land. So what did he do? He said to his children, when the guy comes, let him enter, and then I come, so he is the one who's going to stand for me and respect me, not I stand for him and respect him. There's another interesting story that happened with King Faisal, son of King Hussein of Arabia, of Hijaz. King Hussein, the grandfather of the kings of Jordan. So he had 3 sons, King Hussein. He had 4 sons. He had Ali, who took place in Hijaz, and then he was kicked out when Abdul Aziz, the son of Abdul Aziz ibn Saud, took place. So he kicked them out to Jordan. And he had Abdullah, who was the king of the East Bank, or east of Jordan. And he had Faisal, who took place in Syria, and then he took place in Iraq until his grandson was killed, and then the whole kingdom collapsed and they made it republic. So King, I think he had a 4th son, Faisal, Abdullah, and Ali. I forgot who was the 4th. So King Faisal, when he took place in Syria, in Damascus, Sheikh went to visit him. So when he respected them, he sat with them, and then he said to him, he started discussing in several things. All of a sudden, he took out a cigarette and he wanted to smoke. So Sheikh took his hand, stopped. He said, why? Is it haram? He says, yes, it's haram. He said to him, but our mufti, who was a Hanafi mufti, says that it's permissible. He said, so the Hanafi mufti said, yes, it's permissible, and there's nothing about that. And I show you, Jalalat al-Malik, your Majesty. And he got out a cigarette and he started smoking. The Shaykh started smoking. So the king was upset about that, and he kicked him out of being a mufti. He kicked him out of being the mufti. Where actually, and then the king said to Sayyidi Muhammad bin Ja'far, he said, but ya Sayyidi, I get bored, so I just smoke. He said, when you get bored say salatu ala your grandfather, because he says that he's from the generation of the Prophet ﷺ, the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ. So he said, keep on saying as-salatu ala Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Your grandfather, praise your grandfather sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Keep on praying on your... And then when he wanted to go out, the king just stood up like this, and he said, yes, Shaykh. He said, no, this is not the way how your grandfather sallallahu alayhi wa sallam used to treat scholars. You have to come with me to the door, and that's how you respect scholars. This is the way of Imam Malik rahimahullah, how he used to make himself respected near the kings. And this is the way of the real scholars. They are humble with humble people, but when it comes to people like this, they show them that they are scholars. You don't become humble to these guys. You show them that you are a respected person, you are a scholar, you have the knowledge that Allah gave you, and you are responsible to spread it. So you don't become humble near these guys, so they humiliate you and humiliate the knowledge that you have. You see? And that's the mistake of lots of people who, instead of, they become arrogant near poor guys, and they become humble near people like these guys, rulers and stuff like that. Imam Muhammad Ja'far rahimahullah had a lot of students that later on became leaders of against the colonization of their enemies. For example, the great Mujahid Muhammad ibn Abdul Karim al-Khattabi, that was against the Spanish colonization northern Morocco, he was a student. So Shaykh used to send lots of letters, and we have lots of letters between Shaykh and Imam Amir al-Khattabi, who used to take advices and stuff like that from Imam Muhammad Ja'far, and Muhammad Ja'far used to gather money and stuff like that to help him. The same thing with Ahmad al-Sharif al-Sanusi rahimahullah, the great mujahid of Libya. Al-Imam Ahmad al-Sharif al-Sanusi rahimahullah, he wasn't only a mujahid in Libya, he fought against France and Britain and other governments, other colonizations. So he was a very, very respected mujahid. He was a scholar, he was an Islamic leader, and Umar al-Mukhtar, who was well known in Libya, he was one of his soldiers. People don't know that because the film that spoke about Umar al-Mukhtar didn't speak about that. The film spoke about Umar al-Mukhtar without speaking about the relationship between him and the Sanusi Zawiya. The Sanusi Zawiya's leader was Imam Ahmad al-Sharif al-Sanusi, who was a very respected and brave man. But later on, he couldn't stand there, so he migrated to Turkey, and then he couldn't stand in Turkey because Turkey changed. So Sheikh Muhammad Ja'far wrote to King Abdul Aziz in Arabia to respect this guy and to welcome him. And that's what happened, and he welcomed him in Medina, and he stayed in Medina until he passed there, rahimahullah tabaraka wa ta'ala. There are a lot of messages between Imam Muhammad Ja'far and Imam Ahmad Sharif al-Sanusi, who used to speak with Imam Muhammad Ja'far as his sheikh. And there are several messages and letters between them, and he used to support them. So Imam Muhammad Ja'far, yes, he went out of Morocco because he couldn't stay under the colonization of the enemies of Islam, but he used to support the Mujahideen. He used to send them money. And that's why when he passed, a very big French magazine, it's called Le Temps, which means the morning, wrote, "Today the great enemy of France has passed away. Today the great enemy of France has passed away." And the struggle, the Mujahideen strugglers against French colonization in Morocco, used to find that the book of Nasihatu al-Islam is their constitution that they use to encourage people to struggle against the enemies that invade their countries. And one of them says in a poem, مقلدا لليثنا الغضنفري سيدنا محمد بن جعفر. That means we are following our great lion, brave lion, Sayyidina Muhammad ibn Ja'far, rahimahullah ta'ala. Imam Muhammad Ja'far, rahimahullah, had a lot of students everywhere, in Morocco, in Algeria, in Tunisia, in Libya, in Egypt, in Hijaz, in Sham, in Iraq, in India. Lots of students everywhere. Some of them participated in his lectures, some of them used to take his advice, some of them used to send messages to him. And all kings of these lands, even from the Ottoman Empire, the Hijazis, the Hashemites in Hijaz, the kings of the rulers of Morocco, the rulers of everywhere he went, they used to respect him a lot. And he didn't used to show them any way that he wants something from him. He was very satisfied in his way of life, and he didn't used to take anything from anybody unless they are his students or stuff like that. They give him gifts. But kings and stuff like that, he used to respect himself in his relationship with them. Okay. He had several children. The elder is Muhammad al-Zamzami, who was a scholar who was a professor in. He studied with his father. He studied in Qaraween, and then he went back to Morocco, and he passed in the year 1371, which is 1951. And the second one, who was in a strong relationship with his brother, Muhammad al-Makki, who settled in Syria, and his children are still in Syria until now. And he created the Scholars League of Syria, of Bilad al-Sham. And he was very strong in speaking to politicians, and even the governments of Syria when they want to make any government, they used to take his advices and stuff like that. And he left a lot of students in Syria. Rahimahullah. He passed in the year 1394 or something like that, which is 1974 approximately. The third is Idris ibn Muhammad Ja'far, Dr. Idris, and a lot of people know him. He just passed 2 years ago in a high age, and he studied two types of studies. He studied in Qaraween of Fez, and he took his PhD from Canada in social studies and stuff like that. He was very brave in saying the truth and struggling. He has lots of books. He wrote a lot of books. And other sons of Sayyid Muhammad Ja'far rahimahullah studied in Qaraween, but they're not like these three children. All of them studied Islamic studies and stuff like that, but they weren't like these three brothers. He had two knowledgeable daughters, which is Khadija, who wrote the poem with her hand, and Habiba, which was the responsible of which she was the responsible of all things that have to do with the economics in the house. Sheikh used to give her all things that have to do with economics in the house. I think this gives us an image about Imam Muhammad bin Ja'far al-Kettani rahimahullah. And if you have later on any questions, we can speak about that in the session that speaks about that we are going to do about answers and questions, inshallah. Thank you very much for being patient with me. And inshallah, next lecture, we're going to enter the poem and speak. Alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khair.